Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Bailey. I'm one of the co-founders of From Day One, and this is our forum on corporate values. I'm looking forward to hosting today's webinar. But before I do, I want to share something special we have for attendees of today's webinar. Our next virtual monthly conference on April 21st is entitled Digital Tools for Building an Engaged, Productive Team. This one is our most hands-on and practical conference of the year. So if you're an HR professional and you've been trying to get your head around the digital tools and options that are available for collaboration, employee engagement, diversity, inclusion metrics, avoiding bias in recruiting, and many other really worthy topics, this is a great conference for you. And thanks to our partners and thanks to today's sponsor, we have some comp VIP tickets available, and those are just for people who joined today's webinar, which is you. So I'm going to put a link in the chat right now. You're going to want to take advantage of this one. Regular price for our conference tickets every month is usually $149. This link that I'm pasting in the chat right now is going to give you actually a free VIP ticket for the whole day's activities. And again, you can thank our sponsor for that. Give me 1 second while I cut and paste that into your chat. And you should see that shortly. So this is great. So that's a direct link that should be in your chat right now. And that will get you right into our Hopin platform, which is what we use for our full day virtual conferences every month. And you should see a special ticket open up for you with that link that will enable you to register as a VIP. So Anne, thanks again for joining today, and on to today's webinar. Today we're going to be exploring the topic titled Serendipity, the happy accidents that bring teams together. So they used to happen at the water cooler, the snack bar, informal encounters where team members would trade small talk and big ideas. But in an increasingly remote and hybrid workforce, those chance meetings have been disrupted. So how can employers put in place programs, incentives, and tools to bring their people together virtually? And what sustainable practices can be put in place as some employees transition back to the office? The potential benefits are many: a richer corporate culture, more innovation, and stronger bonds of inclusion. Our sponsor today is Donut, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them. Donut connects individuals for serendipitous conversations that build camaraderie, collaboration, and community. Whether teams are co-located, hybrid, or fully remote, Donut creates and strengthens connections across the organization. It happens right in Slack. Now, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded. It's going to be available on demand soon after the event. So you can look out for an email that'll get to you in about 24 hours, and that'll contain the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session. Those come from SHRM, Society for Human Research Management, and HRCI. Also, look out for a written account of this conversation. That's going to be on our website soon, which is fromday1.co. And now, with all the logistics out of the way, don't forget to register for the session on April 21st. I would like to introduce our moderator, Lydia Dishman. She's a business journalist, and she reports and edits for Fast Company on tech and leadership. She's also written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, Popular Science, the New York Times, and is a frequent moderator for From Day One. Thanks again, Lydia, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I think we're going to have a fantastic discussion, not the least part of which is the fact that the title, Serendipity, just sounds so lovely for an afternoon discussion. Anyway, if you've tuned in before, but maybe you haven't, you may know that I've become rather fond of saying, never let a good crisis go to waste over this past year. And in the case of this particularly chaotic and challenging 12 months, it appears that we've had multiple opportunities to refine and redefine how we work together, most of them for good. But this idea of serendipity that came from casually connecting in a physical space has largely been missing, and the efforts to collaborate virtually don't always work. So I was looking for some research, particularly around what the last major upheaval in our economy was, and that was the 2008 financial crisis. And I found research headed by Heidi Gardner and Ivan Matviak, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, that suggests that collaboration in crisis is key to the long-term commercial success of an organization. In writing in Harvard Business Review, the two said, particularly in crisis, organizations need to pull together experts with unique cross-functional perspectives to solve rapidly changing complex problems that have long-term implications. The diversity of experience allows a group to see risks and opportunities from different angles so that it can generate new solutions and adapt dynamically to changing situations. And they went on to cite research that suggests that anxiety during times of chaos makes people more risk averse. And as a result, they're less likely to seek out those different perspectives and just fall back into what's always worked before. So that desire to bring things under control can also lead to a go-it-alone mentality. So resources often focus on self-preservation and keeping things status quo rather than reaching out and being innovative and experimenting. So how can workers take this inflection point where we're still sort of uncertain about the future, and many of us are risk averse and frankly anxious about what the future holds, and break out and collaborate? And to discuss this with me is Dan Manian. And so by way of introduction, I'm going to ask you to say a little bit about what Donut does and how it helps organizations with this conundrum of collaboration.
Yeah, thanks for that intro, and thanks for chatting with me, Lydia, and thanks, Nick, for the intro. I'm co-founder and CEO of Donut. We're about a 5-year-old startup, and our mission is to help drive human connection at work that increases camaraderie and collaboration and community. We were doing that before we were all remote due to the pandemic. Our product and mission has become more focused and shifted a little bit as everybody has gone remote. So I can talk a little bit about that shift, but in short, what Donut does is it helps people connect with colleagues at their company through a variety of different programs that we help run within Slack. So Donut is heavily integrated with Slack, where people are collaborating and working all day long. But we run programs, anything from as kind of simple as a coffee roulette program, where we'll introduce you to somebody that you may not work with on a daily basis. Before the pandemic, people would actually get coffee in person because Donut introduced them to each other. A lot of people would actually go out and get donuts. That was a surprise when we started the company, how many people literally go get donuts just from the name. Or it could be things with a little bit more purpose and focus, like peer mentorship programs, or deliberately connecting across 2 different teams, like a sales and marketing team, and getting them to collaborate and get more in sync. Before the pandemic, we were primarily introducing you to people not on your direct team. And there's one of the big insights that led us to start Donut was seeing that at large organizations or at startups that were scaling rapidly, silos emerged. We all kind of know about that problem. And then that actually traps innovation within certain teams or certain departments. And there's actually been quite a bit of research around a more connected workforce drives more productivity, drives more innovation, drives more retention. Google, who's done all sorts of studies on their own people, their own kind of people ops team has done studies, actually found their most productive employees built larger networks just by rotating who they had lunch with in Google cafeterias. So Donut's core product offering, which is called Intros, basically lets you operationalize a program like that where you can introduce people to each other. When the pandemic started, things shifted in that people still wanted to meet people they didn't necessarily know, but they also wanted to stay connected with people on their direct team. So you might be on a 10-person marketing team or a 10-person engineering team, and all of a sudden, all of the social interaction structures were just pulled away from us, and we're all sitting at home trapped behind a Zoom. So that really led us to expand our offerings and build some new products, also develop some new use cases. One of the first things that we saw was prior to the pandemic, a pretty common cadence of somebody using Donut would be like every other week, meet someone new on a different team, have a coffee chat with them. The first request we got was for a daily Donut intro. People were just missing that daily water cooler interaction, right? People said, I want a new person to chat with every day. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of the classic, Henry Ford. If I asked my customers that wanted, they'd say a faster horse. So
Faster
in this
horse,
case,
yeah.
if we asked our customers what they wanted, they'd say more virtual coffee meetings. And we actually built it and gave it to them. But that wasn't, it was the right problem, wrong solution. The problem was like the missing water cooler chats. So that actually led us to develop a complementary product, which is less about deep every other week meet someone new and more just on a daily basis having a little in Slack asynchronous conversation. So that sorry for the background
Yeah, I
noise.
was going to say,
You know,
is somebody at the door?
I don't think
You're
I
getting,
need to get it,
you're getting a donut delivery.
yeah, exactly. We do that from time to time on the team at Donut. So yeah, that led us to launch a new product called Water Cooler, which was important in that it's asynchronous. It doesn't require another Zoom. We all kind of learned that Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and it's
Yeah,
exhausting
yeah,
to be
and
talking all
I
day long.
definitely want to talk about that sort of whole trend back away from, super connectivity versus separation.
Yeah. So maybe I'll pause there and see where you want to go from there.
Well, yeah, and one thing that I wanted to ask you was, what kind of companies are using Donut? Because you're obviously a startup, but I'm sure you have larger enterprises that are working with you versus smaller ones. What kind of trends are you seeing, in terms of large versus small companies?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we have anywhere from 10-person startups to Fortune 100 companies using us. These problems are not really unique to any company size. I will say that we didn't have so many 10-person startups that were co-located using us before the pandemic. I would say before the pandemic, unless you were 50 or 100 people, you didn't necessarily need Donut to help your team connect. But now it really is kind of the full range. I think the challenges vary, although even within large enterprises, you sort of have the microcosm of a 10-person team, a 25-person team, or a 50-person org that's trying to forge deeper connections while simultaneously helping people connect across the broader organization.
Right.
Some of our users give us feedback like Donut has helped them get a wider understanding of their organization and the business because they've been connecting with other parts of the org and other teams that do different things that they didn't kind of understand before.
Well, and I was thinking about it in terms of, something that you said earlier and, something that actually Nick said in the intro, which was about, fostering this greater productivity and also fostering innovation. And obviously there's a business case to be made for collaboration. Certainly the research points to it. But all these measures, traditional measures of productivity and collaboration have changed radically. So what are you seeing in terms of how people are measuring sort of the impact on engagement with these connections that they're making through Donut?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, people are certainly employing employee engagement surveys and things like that. We have some customers that have actually correlated Donut participation with employee net promoter score for how happy they are at an organization. Separate from Donut, there's all sorts of research around having friends or having a best friend at work really increases happiness at work and increases the likeliness that you'll stay. So we see, people teams and HR teams will employ engagement surveys. We have reporting in Donut that shows how much people are using it and how engaged folks are, which allows you to do some of that cross-reporting. I think one of the things that's gotten harder is you used to be able to walk into an office and like feel the vibe a little bit, right? Like you'd kind of know, is the office down or not, or like what's the mood?
Definitely.
It's kind of hard now, right? Like everybody's just kind of point to point in Zooms. So I think that's become a bigger challenge, which means leaning on tools with some instrumentation,
Mhm.
looking at Slack activity, and other things like that become really important.
Mhm.
But we've also um, seen things like skip level one-on-ones and people doing things like CEO lotteries, which I can talk a little bit about, to
Mhm.
make sure that there's some connection between multiple layers in organization. We've seen that
Mhm.
become really important as well, which I would say is a little bit more of a qualitative replacement for that,
Mhm.
like what's the mood of the and vibe of the office.
Yeah, I first want to talk a little bit more about, you mentioned intros, which is that Slack integration. So allowing people on different teams to get to know each other.
Yep.
Obviously, designed to be an in-person thing. Now it's virtual. And you talked a little bit about how people wanted more connection than wanted less connection. What were the other sort of things that came up in a virtual environment? Do people have to turn on their cameras, or can they just talk without that? Because I mean, that's been a thing on Zoom meetings now. Like, well, you could be there, but your camera's off, and that kind of takes away from the interaction, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We were actually just talking about that internally in norms around that. Um, I think now that we're a year into this, I think there's probably a, a, a time and a place for having your video on, but sometimes people just need a break, and it kind of needs to be okay to turn it off. Um, Increasingly I've seen people do kind of a walk and talk meeting that's on the phone, like the real phone. And like two people go out and get a walk together, obviously not really together, but with AirPods in. And I think the video off, and this is kind of my personal experience, if it's a one-on-one, it's kind of okay if you both turn your video off, as long as you're kind of in sync. And that's sort of like the agreed upon norm. Like phone calls worked before we had Zoom. Conference calls are hard because you don't have video cues for like I want to butt in with something. But if it's a one-on-one, I think there's an opportunity there to kind of give yourself a little bit of a break and ask, okay, do I need to be sharing my screen because we have some content to do in this meeting? Or are we just like catching up and we can do a voice only call and give our eyes a break from staring at a screen? Um, I think I think having no video would be problematic. It's hard to connect really with a person if you can't kind of build that kind of with some visual cues. But I think we've also learned there is such a thing as overdosing on Zoom video calls. So giving people other modalities to connect, and whether that's voice or whether that's doing things creatively in Slack or asynchronously, I think there's a lot of ways to build human connection.
One of the things that you mentioned about silos and certainly corporate hierarchy reminded me of recently talked to the head of culture at NASA, and she was saying that they actually have better meetings now, more equitable meetings now, because there was always the hierarchy in the conference room. Like the important players are sitting around the table, and then the plus ones are like either sitting on the floor or on the windowsills. And so I'm thinking about this notion of breaking through not just silos between parts of the organization, but from the top down. And you had mentioned something about, was it Okta with the CEO?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about that offline. Yeah, talk a little bit about that, because I love to hear that, this pandemic has been the great equalizer. So
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting observation about like the arrangement of the meeting room. I think for sure, before we were all remote, there were plenty of meetings where there's four people in a room and two people dialed in, and those two people dialed in are at a huge disadvantage, right? Like they have to scream to be heard, right? And they just get forgotten, and then somebody jumps up to a whiteboard and they can't see it, right? Like that was a hugely inequitable meeting experience,
not
which
to mention crosstalk, which
yeah,
was always a problem and resulted in that really funny video from a number of years ago.
yes, exactly. So I think this has been a great equalizer in terms of ridding ourselves of that kind of dynamic. We're all kind of on equal footing now, stuck in the same little boxes that, are all the same size as each other. And the same thing with that meeting room layout you talked about. There's kind of the inner circle and then the more junior folks or whatever. So I think that's definitely something that is a good outcome of this. So one of the things that we've seen leadership and executives at our customers do, and Todd, the CEO of Okta, is an example of this, is run a roulette or lottery program where a random person or group of people from the organization get to have a lunch or a one-on-one with that person. So Okta is a pretty big company and public company, and every week, once a week, one lucky Octonaut, as they call their employees, gets to have a one-on-one with Todd. And Donut facilitates who that is. And, it's a pretty big deal to get 30 minutes on the calendar with the CEO. So I think that's a really creative way for executives in this environment to be more accessible. It used to be you could walk around the office and say hi to people and say, how's it going? And just get 2 minutes here and there. And at least there's some of that presence and some feedback loops there. But that just kind of disappears when you're remote. I mean, sure that you can do, all company meetings and things like that, but that's a one-to-many and you're not getting input. So I know Todd has also said it's been hugely helpful for him because, again, that the kind of vibe of the culture in the room, as leaders, we don't have the same feedback loop. So I think he's getting some of that from the one-on-one conversations. And of course, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. The problem with walking around the office is, Todd lives in one place. He's not in all of the offices. So it's even more equitable from that standpoint as well, that doesn't matter if you're, around the world, you could still get a one-on-one with Todd.
And when you say that Donut facilitates it, this is the lottery part of it, that it just everybody throws their name in and you just randomly generate?
Yep, to opt in, people just join a Slack channel that's dedicated for this Donut program. And then Donut has a number of kind of settings behind the scenes where you can choose how frequently is there an intro, should it be one-on-one, should it be a group of a certain size, and then you can specify a certain person is always included. So Donut is just automatically making the groups. Then it actually makes an introduction on Slack. It opens up a multi-party direct message between Todd and whoever the lucky person is. So it's literally putting them together. We have calendar integrations and things like that. So it's really seamless to schedule it from there. So yeah, Donut kind of facilitates the whole program. Otherwise, you'd have someone needing to have the employee roster, have a mechanism to opt in, pick someone out of a hat, and it's a project otherwise. So we have customers that have more than, I should have described what we consider a connection program. I described one. We have large enterprise customers with more than 100 connection programs running inside their company, because the CEO might be doing a lottery, then you have an engineering team over here doing a weekly coffee thing, then you have an ERG over there doing small group discussions once a month. So Donut is facilitating all these different ways that people can connect and meet.
I'm thinking about what you talked about making sure that people are included, because a lot of talk around working remotely is the introvert's paradise. They can just kind of fade into the background, do their thing, get in the zone, not have to deal with anyone. And also, a detriment to extroverts like me who love to be in front of people and talking all the time. How does Donut facilitate the inclusivity of all of these types of people? I mean, who's responsible ultimately, making sure everybody comes together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So and we've gotten over the years lots of feedback from extroverts and introverts alike, and there's certainly a scale and gradations, and I think they use our our product differently. They have sort of different usage patterns. For our kind of core intros offering that I just described, there are definitely introverts that use it and love it and kind of describe it as, if you're at an event and you want to start having a conversation with someone, there's sort of that, like, you got to get over the hump of like walking up to them and saying, "Hi, I'm Dan," right? Like that little icebreaker. But then once you get through that and you start that conversation, it's like, okay, we're talking, we're here now. So I've had people describe Donut to us as we kind of push you over that little hump. We put you together on Slack. We say, yeah, you're going to grab coffee, right? Like, this is why you both opted into this thing,
Yes,
right?
and now it's happening.
And now it's happening. And here's a button actually that says you're both free tomorrow at 2:30. Literally click it and you'll have a calendar event with a Zoom link on your calendar, right? So we've tried to take all of that sort of like the social awkwardness of like, are we doing this? Are we not doing this? Is the thing, like, we help you make it happen. We've also built things like conversation starters and little prompts so that there isn't then the like, what are we talking about here?
I definitely wanted to ask you about that because, I've been to so many events where the icebreaker question, even with the best intentions, can really kind of go wrong very quickly. And my most cringeworthy one, if you'll indulge me, and let me tell you about this one, was at a fairly large dinner, but everyone could hear everyone. So it was just a big table. And they asked us about who our first kiss was. So, I mean, everybody played along, but I could definitely see like there was a pause when the question was posed. So how do you avoid that?
Yeah. Well, number one, don't have that question in our question bank is how we avoid that. I'm proud to say that's not in our bank of conversation starters.
Good to know, and good for our audience to know, sure.
Yeah. Actually, in all seriousness, I mean, writing good conversation prompts is really, really difficult. And we have them built into our intros product and then our water cooler product, just to describe that for a second, because it relates to this. Instead of introducing people to have a live conversation, Donut will just post a conversation topic in a dedicated Slack channel, and then people discuss it asynchronously in Slack. So that's been, and people frequently have that running on a daily basis. So like every day it might ask, what's your favorite form of potato? Or what was your first job? Or how do you like your
much less problematic than kissing.
Yes, much less problematic. And people have, back to the introvert thing, we got feedback that for the really extreme introverts, that even just doing like an intro 30-minute Zoom thing is just like way too much. The water cooler product lets them participate in a really, really kind of low lift way. They're just in a Slack channel. Some days maybe they'll just add a reaction to a post, right? And like put a little thumbs up on somebody else's answer, but they're engaging, right? Like they're there, they're learning about their coworkers. And then, maybe the next question is, what was your first concert? And they're a huge music lover and like they want to say like, yeah, my first concert was Van Halen, and like just like get into it. So
R.I.P. Eddie. Just go on.
So I think that's been a great way to get introverts involved. Now back to the conversation topic question. We have a whole bank of hundreds of them that we've partnered with some organizations on them, and some of them we've just written whole packs ourselves. Number one, we test them on ourselves. So it's not just me or one person being like, okay, is this appropriate? We all are going to see. I mean, the one you gave is pretty obviously like, okay, that's probably wasn't a good idea. But there are ones that are not ideal, that are a more subtle issue, right? So it frequently takes multiple eyes on it to make sure we catch these things, right? Are we thinking about all the DEI implications a question might have, and are we framing things in an inclusive way, right? And are we using any language that we shouldn't be using?
Yeah, 100%. That's what I was getting at, because I feel like, even with the best intentions, people do feel left out because their lived experience doesn't line up necessarily with what everybody else is talking about. And who knows what that is unless you're really putting it out there for a lot of people. And you're saying that all 15 people on your team are responsible for vetting these questions?
Uh, not, we don't get 15 people's eyes on everything, but we at least get a handful. And we make sure that that handful are from a diverse set of backgrounds, right? So like, it's not just a bunch of people that look like me vetting them, right? Because we're all gonna see different things. And then we do use them internally. And when we're using them internally, then there are, we're all in the channel and everybody's seeing them go by.
Well, I'm also thinking about, and this is obviously, you don't have any control over it from where you're sitting, but from what you're hearing from your partner companies, your clients, who in the organization should be responsible for ensuring that these conversations are healthy and productive? I mean, is there just like an appointed, like someone policing the conversations, for lack of a better way to put it?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and we see a pretty big variety in that. And it depends on the organization. It also depends on what the purpose of the donut program is and who's participating. So, as an example, at a large enterprise, there might be some programs that are rolled out by the HR team or an internal comms team or a team that's focused on internal culture. And they're looking at, I don't know if they would call it policing, but they're monitoring. Are things going well? Is this productive and healthy? But then the way Donut is built is, well, an engineering manager over here with a 25-person team can set up a program for their team. And then they're the ones that it's sort of their purview to make sure, is this the right thing for my team? I mean, we've seen like the water cooler questions. We've seen product and engineering teams customize the questions and have them be like, to have or not to have a product roadmap debate, right? And like, sure, they're getting to know each other and building connection. It's a work-related question. And it's a constructive conversation that frankly might have happened over a casual lunch if we had an office, right? And then you kind of get into that debate and it's kind of a fun thing, but a productive thing. So I don't think you can have a singular, like, here's the person or team that is overseeing this. I think if there's a common thread, it's people or teams in some kind of a leadership role, whether that's at a company level, thinking about team and culture and people ops, or if it's at a more kind of granular level, a manager or a director of a certain functional area.
Just want to pause to, before I go on to my question next, tell the audience, please feel free to drop your burning questions in the box, in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible at the end. I think we're going to leave about 10 minutes for audience Q&A. So encouraging you all to drop your questions in, and thank you. Okay. You mentioned this kind of fun work debate, and I'm wondering if there is any data that you've gathered on how much of these conversations are strictly work or just people getting to know each other, and does work come out of it? Not necessarily a chicken and egg question, but sort of.
Yeah. That's a really great question. We see companies frame Donut both ways at the outset. We've seen people do the coffee roulette program where it's talk about anything but work. So we've definitely seen that. But we also see people set up a Donut channel for a sales team where the agenda is, hey, we're launching a new product, practice your demo with each other, right? And like match you up with a different random salesperson, and you're actually like doing a feedback loop there, and you're kind of like, you're doing work. So I think there's a huge spectrum of how people use it. I think in the enterprises that use this most robustly, they're actually doing all of the above. And I think that's important, actually, back to the inclusivity and kind of introvert and extrovert question. Different people want to build relationships in different ways, right? So if we rewind to when we had offices, people would bump into each other at the water cooler, refilling their coffee. There were happy hours, there were team lunches, there were maybe opportunities to opt into being an onboarding buddy and things like that. A lot of people would just pick and choose the things that felt right to them, right? Like not everybody loves company happy hours. People become friends at company happy hours. They serve a purpose, but they're not the end all be all. So it's actually, even in the IRL world, I don't think there's like a singular, here's how to build relationships. There's actually a menu of options for different personality types to choose from. So I think in the kind of remote work, virtual world, a similar thing is true. There's going to be people that are, I'm not comfortable just having some random coffee chat that's agendaless. This doesn't feel right, but I would love to get an intro to someone with the same, technical learning interest as me, and you're going to build relationships that way. So I think I know I sort of like skirted the question a little bit of which is it, but I think what we really see is that it's in large part both, and that people do both things.
Well, you already touched on this, but I'm thinking about the sustainability of all of this, all of these types of connections. I mean, obviously in a workplace, you can walk to the coffee machine and not talk to anyone, just get your coffee and walk back. You can ignore people on the way to the bathroom. And there was always that debate on how many times do you see the same person and say hello to them every single time, which is something we don't have to think about anymore. But in terms of making sustained efforts around these type of connections, which is important, especially as we're still in this limbo of not knowing how it's all going to shake out. What are some best practices that you've seen for making those sustained efforts work?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I'll preface it by saying I don't have all the answers yet. We're learning as we go. But I think this has been a really interesting challenge, especially, and I think a lot of us have had this experience this year, is you have new colleagues that you've never had the opportunity to meet in person. And so it's like 100% Zoom. So how do you turn that into a kind of longer arcing, and how do you build those deeper relationships that are not just a kind of a one-off? So in terms of those sustained connections, I think one of the things that we've been kind of experimenting with is how do you create opportunities to, if you're beginning a friendship, for lack of a better word, make sure that there's some ongoing cycle of reconnecting and having new and different things to talk about. I think one of the things that's a little bit harder to do when you're remote is discover some of the common interests that you might have. For us, our water cooler channel has actually been a really important thing there, because if I'm like, yeah, my first concert was Van Halen, then somebody else threads off and says, whoa, I love Van Halen too, right? And like, you just miss that otherwise, right? Like, how do you even uncover that little common bond you have together? We've definitely at Donut, I think a lot of organizations do this, you kind of develop inside jokes over time, and have, reuse the same kind of, whether it's emojis or GIFs or reactions, and things can like take on its own meaning, and you sort of create this community and culture and your kind of own language around things. So that's something that we've done, and I know some of our customers have done as well, to like really customize what they're doing in general or with Donut to be really kind of culture specific for them.
And what would that look like, even from your perspective? I mean, because when you say something like that, I'm thinking about like when a company puts their mission statement on the wall, or stuff like that.
Yeah. So for us, and I mean, we're maybe a little abnormal in that like we think about how to connect all day long. So we're constantly like doing things like little hackathons and let's build a new feature and test a thing on ourselves and see what happens. Um, um, so I think for us, it's coming up with some kind of a thesis and building a thing and try it. So like we actually have a few things now that we're playing with internally around how do you kind of keep in touch with people that you might have grabbed, you would have grabbed coffee with once a month that are not on your team. How do you facilitate some of those kinds of things? I've recently started using Donut to do my skip level one-on-ones in a way that is much easier to manage than trying to have calendars. But yeah, I mean, it can be as silly as someone's wacky answer to a water cooler question just getting recycled over and over again because it turns into being a funny. So there was one answer that was I don't even know what the initial question was. Favorite
No,
food or
because
something
now
like
it's
that.
now it's meme worthy. Go on.
Yeah, exactly. It was like favorite food or something like that, and somebody posted this picture that's not very appetizing of a collection of it was like a bowl of cereal with some hot dogs in it, and it's like but like every food question now, it's like, okay, that's going to be one of the answers. So it's sort of like, I mean, it is meme worthy. It's sort of an internal meme. That
Yeah,
kind
but that's sort of the glue that kind of keeps everybody together. If they can fall back on that joke, that's the private LOL that you get.
exactly.
So,
That's exactly right.
um, so in terms of the company themselves, like how would a leader, HR or whoever's sort of in charge of integrating the system and making sure that it gets used, handle communicating like rules and norms around connecting?
Yeah, that's a great question. For sure, setting kind of clear expectations is really important. Um, Another thing that we learned early on is it's really important to let people explicitly opt in to participating in these programs. So if this is a forced thing, if this is sort of like forced fun, you got to have coffee with someone, not going to work, right? Like you're gonna have a little bit of a revolt on your hands. So I've sort of given a bunch of different examples of different programs. I don't think there's one that's necessarily the right thing to start with, but it usually starts with one program. Let's just say it's every 2 weeks, grab a virtual coffee with someone. Um, an internal comms team or the leader or whoever has set that up, communicating out however they communicate it. Maybe it's at an all hands, maybe it's a Slack post, maybe it's an email, whatever is the normal mode of sort of announcing something. Announce this new Slack channel, set expectations that, hey, you're going to get an intro every 2 weeks. The expectation is spend 30 minutes chatting with them. There'll be some conversation prompts, get to know someone on the team that you don't necessarily know. And then inviting people to simply join that Slack channel and participate. I think once that has some legs to it, teams can open up and educate other leaders in the organization how they can start their own channel with its own purpose. And that's when we see things get really rich and that there's multiple avenues and opportunities for people to participate, whether it's a mentorship program or learning thing or just purely social. We have some we have some kind of pre-built programs that are around DEI discussion groups or mentorship that are more serious in nature. And then we have others that are like a selfie contest where you can, the whole point is like get together with 3 people and do some wacky Zoom screenshot selfie and you repost it in the channel and vote on it. And there's a winner every week. And at Donut, we do multiple of these things, right? Because it's different ways of connecting with people. But I think letting people opt in and setting really clear expectations around what it means to join this channel and this program is probably the best way to set yourself up for success.
So in other words, no one is having any mandatory fun. Like
That's
this is
right.
all completely opted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And our experience has been it's worry less about how many people opt in right off the bat and where it gets to in the long run, right? Because
Right.
even if it starts a little smaller, but people are having a great time, word gets out, and then other people want to participate.
Precisely.
Whereas if you kind of opt everybody in automatically and half the people don't want to be there, it really drags the experience down for everybody involved.
Just want to remind people again to drop your questions in the Q&A box if you have them. We are getting a number of them. And Dan, I have to say, a lot of people want to know what happens if you don't use Slack. We have Carice, Pat, Helena, Gina. Any plans to integrate with Microsoft Teams? Yeah, so.
This is a great question, and it's really great feedback. Today, you do need to have Slack. Microsoft Teams is definitely something that's on our radar. I will say a big part of the integration and kind of philosophy there is that similar to going to an actual water cooler, we really want to be integrated with where people are doing their work. So we don't want to pull people to a new application where they have to figure out a whole new interface just to connect with someone and have a meeting, right? The point isn't really using Donut. The point is the person on the other side.
Right.
So right now that means in Slack. In the future, that will mean integrating with other things. And I definitely appreciate all the team's requests. It's helpful to see what folks are interested in.
Yeah, I think a lot of people move to Teams, especially over this past year, because there is a lot more functionality than just doing Zoom. So Pat's additional question, though, was we're a Microsoft shop. Is Donut a standalone cloud-based product that does not require any integration into other systems?
Yeah, so right now it does require integration into Slack.
Okay.
So there isn't a standalone version of it.
Okay.
But it sounds like for Pat that a Microsoft Teams integration would be helpful. Holler if that's wrong. But like I just said, the goal is not to give the end users a new tool to use. It's to come to where they're already working and give them a really seamless way of meeting new people in that context.
Well, Helena's question is related. As a company with a lot of software programs, we recognize all the ways to use Donut, but want to avoid overwhelming the system. How have companies balanced diversifying Donut options with sustaining participation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I have two suggestions on that front. So number one is anytime you set up a Donut channel and a Donut program, you get to choose the frequency of the intros. Overall, our most popular frequency is every 2 weeks, and that works well for a lot of companies. That works well if you're just going to be in one Donut channel. If you're going to be offering multiple programs, the first thing I'd recommend is decrease the frequency and be deliberate about how you stagger those intros. So maybe instead of virtual coffee being every other week, it's actually only once a month. But then there's another program that's also once a month and offset to that. And then people that really, have an appetite, no pun intended, sorry, for a lot of donut. They can join all the channels, and then they're going to end up with more frequent intros. But if each one of those is set up as weekly or bi-weekly, it's just going to be impossible for people to participate in all of them. And then the other is to segment by, if you segment by purpose and team, it's unlikely that there's going to be people that will opt into every single Donut program. So I think I mentioned we have some large enterprises with more than 100. I haven't checked, but I highly doubt anybody is in all 100. I think that would be impossible.
That'd be a full-time job in and of
Yeah,
itself.
that would be that
Yeah.
would just be 40 hours a week of donut meetings. Maybe that's the future of work, just sitting
Oh,
around
well.
drinking coffee and eating donuts. But yeah, so I think those are the two things. Think, decrease frequency on any given program so that there's more space for different programs, and then also be deliberate about how, like, where you're advertising the different channels and what population a particular program is for.
I had a question around challenges in a more sort of theoretical sense, challenges that virtual connection and collaboration still present, other than obviously fatigue and burnout. Like, is there yet another thing to do? What are some of the other challenges that you're looking to work through?
Um, I think the we've touched on a few of them, but we talked earlier about um, the value in people having a friend. In fact, there's a study out there that having a best friend, answering yes to that question, do you have a best friend at work, really drives happiness, retention, and productivity. I think we're still figuring out how do we help people make a best friend when they're not meeting anybody, right? Like that's a hard problem to solve. Um, so we've built some things in that vein, but we have a lot more that we're thinking about how do we solve that problem? Like how do we, you join a new company and there's so many things, you might do a happy hour with the team, you might have a full team lunch. Like there's things that are very human that happen when you join a company in person that are much more, sort of sterile in a way, and that it's just a Zoom screen and then it turns off at the end of the day and you're sitting on the same couch you were on before you had the job. So I think how do we really build deep relationships, and then in particular for new hires and how we help new hires get integrated. I think the challenge of onboarding people remotely is pretty new, and then I think the last point in terms of things that we are really thinking a lot about is we talked a bunch about inclusivity, is how we uh, build our product and offerings to be inclusive on a whole bunch of different dimensions, but to really try to take advantage of the kind of leveling of the playing field that has happened, and make sure we don't slide backwards when I think we inevitably get to a more hybrid work landscape than fully remote. On some level, I think hybrid is going to be harder. It's going to be, in some ways, easier for those people that opt into going back to an office, but I think there's going to be a lot of people that I think most organizations are going to be pretty permissive of some level of remote work, and making sure that doesn't result in inequity. We talked about sort of the meeting room and what happens in there, but I think you zoom out, there's a much bigger implication is who gets to work on the cool projects, who gets promoted, right? Like, out of sight, out of mind, right? The people that are around the folks that have the power to make those decisions could easily end up with a lot more opportunity just because of geographic proximity. So
That's a
I think,
much bigger challenge than you're aiming to solve here, except for, you are facilitating those connections that might not otherwise take place.
yes, yeah. I
So,
mean, I think our part in that is how do we help that person that's,
mhm,
lives in a cabin and never comes into the office?
right.
How do we help them have deep relationships with the people that do work in the office?
Right. Another question from the audience. Have you encountered leaders worried about using Donut out of concern that the communication between folks would have the opposite of improving the vibe? For example, concerned employees would vent frustration or anger. Are there certain kinds of organizations or leaders that you would not recommend the use of Donut?
Um,
That's a challenging one.
yeah, I mean, I haven't had, it doesn't mean they don't exist, but I haven't had many leaders, or I can't think of any examples where folks have voiced that concern. I think my feeling on that is if folks are in a position where they need to vent their frustration to one another, probably gonna find a way to do it with or without donut. Um, People usually figure out how to go offline with each other and do that. So I think that's there's certainly environments where that's a concern. Um, I would My personal approach would be how can I if that was a concern I had, how can I open up feedback loops and communication lines so that I'm getting that feedback and not in the dark about it. So organizations may have that through anonymous surveys or different things or skip level one-on-ones. But I think it's a pretty big and complex problem. I don't know of any stories where donut exacerbated or kind of made that worse. I think the venting loops probably happen with or without.
You talked about the surveys, and I was going to ask just for a little bit more detail around what you can use to measure engagement and if everything is working. So you have a dashboard that and that's an analytics dashboard.
Yeah.
So people can see just frequency, or can participants rate how their experience went?
Yeah, great question. So so I've sort of referenced two things. One is the reporting that we provide on the usage of our product, and then many organizations outside of Donut will run an employee engagement survey through tools like Culture Amp or Lattice or other survey tools that can sort of complement things, which is sort of outside of the scope of what our product does. Within Donut, you can see that there is an analytics dashboard where you can see program by program, channel by channel, how many participants do you have each round, how many of those introductions actually led to meetings. So you can see what the meeting completion rates look like. We at the beginning of this year, we sent folks like an annual roundup of all the meetings that happened in aggregate at your organization, how that compared to averages across all our customers. So there's some analytics like that, but that lets you really go in and fine tune. Okay, we've got this peer mentorship thing that's awesome participation and all the meetings happen every time, and then we've got this other one that's a little less attended or the meetings are not happening. What can we do about that? So yeah, that helps folks keep a pulse on different programs and participation and completion rates.
Okay, almost out of time. So last question, speed round, as it were.
Yep.
What are the opportunities for collaboration in a hybrid workplace? I'm going to ask you to look in the crystal ball here. And what are you sort of seeing around the edges?
Ooh, what are the opportunities? I mean, the first thing that pops to mind is actually the opportunity to be more inclusive geographically and not have people get left out of the room. I think that's also a risk as we go back to hybrid. So that one like cuts both ways, but I do think it's an opportunity to get something right that the big we didn't have figured out before the pandemic, where remote workers were frequently second-class citizens. I also think there's an opportunity from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint on the hiring front, in that this organizations that may have just had one office or two offices, you're sort of bound by the makeup of the populations in those locations. If you're going fully remote, there's an opportunity to bring a lot of different folks from different backgrounds into your organization and bring new voices to the table and new experiences to the table. So I mean, that's something that we think about a lot for ourselves, but I think is going to be a huge opportunity for companies.
Well said. Something to look forward to anyway, as we move to towards the light at the end of the tunnel, which seems like it's way more within reach than it was even 3 or 6 months ago. So Dan, thank you so much for spending an hour with me chatting. This has been totally fun. I wish I had a donut, but and thank you audience for being with us. Nick?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Lydia and Dan, for that great conversation. Thanks again to our sponsor, Donut, and thanks to you for participating with us today. In case you missed it at the top of the session, I wanted to recap the VIP ticket offer for the next monthly conference. That's on April 21st. It's entitled Digital Tools for Building an Engaged, Productive Team. So hold on one second. Here it is. It's in the chat right now. Once again, this is our most hands-on and practical conference that we do throughout the year. So if you're an HR professional, if you've been trying to get your head around digital tools and options available for collaboration, engagement, D&I metrics, bias in recruiting and avoiding it, and many other topics that relate to digital tools, this is a great one for you. Thanks so much to our sponsors and our partners, especially today's sponsor, who have provided some VIP tickets, complimentary VIP tickets for those who joined today's webinar, which is you. You'll want to take advantage of this if you can. Like I said, the regular price for Conference 6 is $149. This link gives you a free ticket. It's a VIP ticket, takes you into the whole day's activities. Again, that's in the chat. And if you'd like to join us for more virtual events, in addition to this one, you can head to our website at fromday1.co. That's FROMDAYONE.co. And you can check out some upcoming webinars as well. This coming Thursday, April 8th, we have employee stress, how to identify signs, and how to find new remedies. Next Tuesday is coming Tuesday, April 13th, new leadership trends that are changing the way we develop future leaders. Thanks again to all of you for participating today. Stay safe out there and stay well. Thanks again.